Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Abercrombie & Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Bryan Abercrombie and Samuel Sanchez. Bryan has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It is not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. Good afternoon and welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. I am your host, Bryan Abercrombie, and with me, as always, is the yin to my yang, the host as well, the co-host, Sam Sanchez. How you doing, Sam?
Not too bad. The Cassidy to your Sundance, the jalapeno to your nachos.
Yes, the cookies to my cookies and cream ice cream. Unfortunately, that's probably too much cookies and cream ice cream over the course of this pandemic, which means I got to get to the gym. That's another story. We'll talk about that on another podcast. Anyway, just wanted to talk a little bit about, I think we haven't been on for a while. So what you been up to, Sam?
It's been a little crazy. I'm not going to lie. Pandemic, COVID, vaccinated. That's always a good thing, so.
Yes, got my vaccination card. Got my vaccination card as well. So we're headed in the right direction. We've been getting slammed lately, which is really good. But here we are. We thought we'd kick it around a little bit. Let's change our topic up a little bit this week. Not talk about divorce. We're going to talk about a split, the A-Rod J-Lo split, but we're going to talk about it in the context of kind of where I think it's, where we think, and we have kind of had a discussion about it, where we think it's, we wanted to have an episode to talk about small business or business formation or winding up a business or, all of those kinds of things that deal with your small business. If you're a small business owner, I mean, I know there's a lot of issues with small business these days with the COVID and the pandemic and everything, shutdowns, getting back up and running, and hiring employees, forming businesses, all that kind of stuff. But in the context of the J-Lo thing, they were never married, engaged for 2 years, but old A-Rod and J-Lo were pretty busy. They were doing business, doing deals.
Yeah, they were married at the business hip. They may not have been married at the marital hip, but business-wise, they definitely did a lot.
So, Sam, you were a Florida guy for a time. Tell me about Star Island in Miami. Is that really what all it's cracked up to be?
It's where the money is.
Apparently it is, because J-Lo and A-Rod purchased a jointly owned $33 million mansion on Star Island. That's
it's
pretty significant.
There's definitely a prerequisite to lots of dollars to live there. So it's not far from South Beach, and it's a pretty good locale.
And if anybody doesn't know, if you've been under a rock for the last couple of years, J-Lo is what got her start on In Living Color and has parlayed that into quite a successful performance, a movie career with and the records and the dancing and the whole thing. She's quite a success. She's worth probably over $400 million. A-Rod is probably one of the top baseball players of all time. You got the steroid thing, but
I think the Texas Rangers are still paying him, as a matter of fact.
They probably still are. Obviously, he was a Yankee too, and love him or hate him, he has some of the top stat lines of all time in baseball, and he got one of the highest contracts of all time, or at least at the time, it was the highest contract of all time. It obviously since has been surpassed, but it was $215 million or somewhere in that neighborhood. It was fairly substantial. Yeah. So A-Rod and J-Lo get together. They start going into business. I think they were trying to buy the New York Mets.
Yep.
Thankfully, that didn't happen, given the split. They tried to buy, or A-Rod tried to buy a hotel chain. J-Lo, like I said, she's got an entertainment empire worth $400 million.
I think they even like bought a private island in the Caribbean. They bought a bunch of property in Puerto Rico. They had buildings in the Miami area, Los Angeles properties. I mean, they were pretty well diversified. They had a lot of money to be able to do that. And obviously, both successful in their own rights. And, they built entities together. So obviously, a lot of times we spend time talking about, hey, you're going to get divorced. These two were never married. And they very publicly said, we're not married. We're not even engaged some days. So,
and they're not just rich people throwing money around. I mean, their businesses have done decent. I mean, they've have a couple of self-help kind of things, fitness coaching, all that kind of stuff. So they have done pretty well for themselves, according to this article. They've done pretty good in real estate, and so they're not just rich people throwing money around.
No, they've actually got some pretty good people around them that really helped them build an empire together. And in the years that they were together, a lot of times you're really building in the future, especially when there's that proposal, right? There's that, hey, we anticipate this marital union, which really all the marriage law is contract law. So they were already kind of figuring out, like, how do we mesh our empires together? And then you get, to the doorstep of, hey, let's say I do, and they say I don't. And now what, right? So now you're looking at
according to this article, they're still great friends, and so we'll see how the businesses stay together, or whether they stay together when they wrap them up. But I think that maybe ties into our kind of topic du jour, which is your business, which is forming a business.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. Obviously, I mean,
so let's start first with kind of how Okay, let's talk a little bit about forming a business. I mean, first of all, we talked about it a little bit off air, and first and foremost, we thought you kind of got to get a team surrounding you, a good team. And what do you think a good team looks like, Sam?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's always good to have a banker on your side. A lot of times it's going to take some capital or some investment. If you have the dollars, great. Even if you do have the dollars, you may want to use somebody else's money rather than your own. So that's always somebody good. You're going to need a bank account most of the time for businesses anyways, whether it's a commercial account or additional private account. So you're going to want to talk through things with a good banker. On top of that, I would tell you is a good certified public account. CPAs know their way around the tax code. And a lot of times, if you have conversations with your CPA about what you're trying to do in your business, they can help navigate what maybe the best structure is tax-wise for you to create. Is it an LLC? Is it an S Corp? Is it a partnership? There's a lot of different perspectives, and tax perspective is a very important thing to get early on.
Super important. Super important as you find out that first, especially if you have any success coming out of the gates, that first year can be a hickey on the taxes if you're not prepared. You'd also think maybe a business evaluator or somebody to help you get a business plan together, depending on what the type of business you're going into. Is most of the time you're not going to go into something that you don't know about. I mean, some people do, but most of the time you're going to go into a business that you know a little something about. So starting the small business, you want to form an entity. Most likely you're never going to want to run a small business under a sole proprietorship, just from a liability standpoint. And just from looking at, the different ways you can form a business, why would you form a business? I think typically you're gonna form a business for tax reasons, liability reasons being the two biggest things.
Yeah. When I would just before we go too far, obviously a big important person on that list is an attorney. Okay.
Right.
You can have the best tax advice in the world, the best business plan in the world, but if you put together a shoddy organization, or you don't do the articles correctly, or you don't get it registered correctly, you don't have the protections for the liability that potentially you incur. So you have to have a really good lawyer on board to just help kind of tie all these together into a legal entity, whatever that may be, that can help guide the foundation of your business as it grows.
Now let's talk about the different types of entities you can form. At least in Texas, other states have some other kind of little bit of variations on entities. So we won't talk about those, but in Texas, you can form a partnership, you can form a corporation, whether that be a small corporation and like an S Corp or a C Corp, which is obviously a large corporation. You can operate as an LLC, which gives you, profit splitting abilities like a partnership, but it also gives you limited liability protection like a corporation. So those things are, obviously you want to look at what type of business you're going into, whether that's high risk, low risk. You never want to put your personal wealth or security on the line for a business if you can avoid it. That's why you form a corporation or you form an LLC.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's variations like you talked about, obviously partnerships, a lot of people, look at, sole proprietorships and what's the problem with it. Well, you're going to want to talk through those with your CPA, with your attorney. General partnerships, how many people are going to be involved? Is somebody really the money behind it and the other guys are limited partners? How do you want to really deal with liability is a big question that the attorneys will help you answer in relation to each one of those structures. Because what we really talk about when we're trying to give clients direction about what type of business to form is how much exposure, to your point, Bryan, do you want to have personally? Most people say zero, right? Most people say, I don't want to expose any of my personal wealth. The business is one thing, but I want it to be different from me. Well, that means, taking certain steps and measures to ensure separation, right? So we talk about a corporate veil a lot of times in the legal world. All that really means is that any entity that you create operates independent of you personally. It's when you mix those two, and that's usually what a sole proprietor will do. They open themselves up to some liability. So these are the types of conversations that at the very inception of any business that you're going to create, you want to have with all these parties that we've talked about.
Yeah. And even if you're forming a partnership, let's say you're going into business with a friend of yours or whatever, you probably want to try to cap your liability at, whatever your investment is. I mean, that's what a limited partnership, potentially does for you. You're not liable for the other person's bad acts potentially, or you typically trust the person you're going into business with, so you go into business. But I mean, if it goes sideways, you want to have a little bit of a protection so you can have a little bit of out and not expose yourself to too much risk.
Yeah, and that structure that you create is really going to help you with that, right? Obviously, the way you set up the transparency in, if it's a general partnership, or if you're looking at it and you say, well, it's a business and we're going to have a president and we're going to have a treasurer and we're going to have, all these different roles. We have to have annual meetings. There's different prerequisites to maintaining each of these formations, not including registering it with the state in which you're creating this entity. So if you're creating it in Texas, you're creating it in Florida, you're creating it in Maryland, because a lot of people base their corporations out of that state because of the laws and the way they're set up. So, there's just a lot of different things to consider, including your taxes, right? So like personal taxes, business taxes, how they're interrelated. What are you going to do with profits? How do you do distributions? Are you going to issue stock at the inception of your creation of your company? If so, who's going to hold them? When are you going to issue more? How do you let people buy in? These are all, it sounds really easy, to kind of, because there are people who do it. I mean, I'll tell you, I have a friend who went out and just started a lawn business. He said like, hey, I want some extra money. I like being outside. So on weekends and in the evenings in the summertime, he goes out, even though he's got a full-time job and it's a professional job, he was out doing lawns. And he had like just his, in his neighborhood, like 15 lawns. So then all of a sudden he's like, wow, people were asking, hey, will you do mine? Will you do mine? So I expanded. He started hiring people. And before you know it, he's got employees, he's got equipment, he's buying another truck. And we sat down and he asked me, he goes, hey, do you think I should form a business? I was like, yeah, well, you already formed a business. He's like, no, I haven't formed anything. I just started doing this stuff. I didn't even really know, but now it's kind of getting out of hand and people are asking for their W-2s and, I'm supposed to get I-9s. I don't know what any of that crap is. It's like, yeah, I think we need to hold. Let's do some formation. Let's try to go from this point to just make sure you're not giving up your house if something bad happens when you're on somebody else's house.
Right. You don't want somebody's foot to get cut off by a lawnmower and then you lose your house as a result.
You're shattering somebody's vehicle window with a rock that comes out of your lawnmower, and they're like, "Hey, who's paying that?" And you're like, "I thought you were." No.
No, I mean that's to your point. I mean that's a really good point. Where are you going to form your company? When you form it, I mean, oftentimes you want to try to form it probably as near to the time you go into business as you can, just to avoid potential liability pitfalls. But where you're going to form your company. I mean, different states. I mean, everybody used to form their corporations in Nevada or Delaware. That was a huge deal. It wasn't just Joe Biden's state; it was the state where you went to form your corporation, the old Delaware Subchapter S corporation. I think other states have now gotten friendlier corporation laws nowadays, but I hear not Nevada, but Montana may be a good spot. But obviously we're in Texas, so we're talking about Texas mostly. But yeah, where you form your corporation is important, and what you form, like you're saying. I mean, and just to go in briefly, I'll give like a Reader's Digest version, and you can just correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, on what the different entities are. You have a large corporation, which would be a C corp, which you can have an unlimited number of shareholders. You would issue stock. You would have a board of directors. You would have potentially shareholders, board of directors, corporate officers. You can limit the number of all that stuff down, but a C corp does have its own tax category and things like that. An S corp would be a limited minimum number of shareholders. There can only be a certain amount. Limited shareholders, it's a lot more closely held. Allows for a small number of corporate investors to be involved in a company, and then that would typically also have officers and a board of directors potentially for an S corp. It could also help you. It would also be taxed similarly to a partnership or an LLC. An LLC is basically set up like a partnership, but basically each member has what are called membership shares, and then they split profits kind of like a partnership based on your membership shares. And then it gets the limited liability protection of a corporation. Then a partnership is typically 50% or whatever the partnership is. A straight partnership is typically one or more partners owns whatever percentage, and they also share the liability in whatever percentage. And then there could be limited partnerships where one person owns a limited part of the business, but they still share in a certain amount of profit. And then vice versa. There's limited and general partners in a limited partnership. So the general partner would control almost everything. A limited partner would be probably the money man, typically, and then they would get return on their investment. And then keep in mind that all of this stuff can be stacked. So you can have a corporation that's owned partially, you can have a corporation on the top that's got some shareholders potentially that are individuals and possibly some other business entities. You can have an LLC that's owned by a partnership. You can have a corporation that's got an LLC in there. You got all kinds of different spinoffs you can do. And it sounds confusing, but let's say you're in a business and you have, let's talk about your guy that had the lawn business. Let's say he has the lawn business over here and it's in an LLC or whatever entity he wants to put it in. But let's say he decides to go out and says, you know what, Sam, I like Chick-fil-A. I'm going to go invest in Chick-fil-A and buy myself a Chick-fil-A franchise. He's probably not going to want to have the Chick-fil-A franchise and the lawn business underneath the same umbrella. So you'd probably form a different company to hold the Chick-fil-A asset and a different company to hold the lawn company asset. And then potentially a parent company on top that would kind of administer, everything. It kind of keeps things cleaner, keeps your profit streams, and it keeps your liability separated. But that's really where the team comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, that's where you're exactly right. That's where your CPA can come in and say, hey, look, for tax purposes, keeping this entity that usually takes a loss separate from this other company that, is on its own, has its own, property that it owns and is turning a profit, the parent company filing their own individual tax return. Because when we say an entity, what most people have to understand is that we're not just talking about the name of a company. You're actually creating a fictional individual, an individual that can own property, an individual that can have their own tax bill, an individual that can have their own credit lines. I mean, these are things that a company, when you create it correctly, is like a person, a virtual person. And that can be very helpful to a business starting up or even an existing business when they look at it and they say, we've grown bigger than what we started. We started out as a general partnership, but now we're so big, we need to allow other people in, or we need to restructure it for tax purposes, or we need to really look at limiting our liability. And so it can be that transition that, like you said, stacks, what used to be an LLC or a GP into, an S Corp or a C Corp, and any combination thereof, depending on what's most beneficial to you. And that's where that team is really going to help you solidify that plan. On top of that too, I would tell you that, things to consider along with this is, businesses are all unique. There's very rarely any two businesses that are exactly the same. And what I mean by that is there's logos. There's potentially, if it's, it's certain things that are going to need to be copyrighted, or, you've come up with this really grand, unique idea that may need to be patented or trademarked. And so, these are the pieces where a lawyer can really help guide you through that process to help you understand, hey, look, you've got the best idea in the world. It's a $1 billion idea. But if you don't protect it, then it's somebody else's $1 billion idea too. And there's nothing you can do about it. And, people will say that, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but it's not in
not the business world.
In business, it just pisses you off, right? You sit there and you're like, what the,
business, that's a lawsuit.
Yeah. And inevitably that's where people get into huge problems, is they sit down and they say, that was my idea. Somebody else will say, well, show me your paperwork, show me your registration paper, show me the trademark or the copyright so that I know I was infringing on it. Because if you don't have that, how am I supposed to be put on notice?
Or if a patent, if it's intellectual property, potentially. I mean,
yeah.
Sure.
And so that really in businesses, I think, is something else that you need to consider. You have the best idea in the world, but if you don't protect it, you don't structure it right, you're just really doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. And then that's where, like I said, that's where the team comes in. Sometimes your specific team is going to have a specific person that it needs on the team, like a patent lawyer, or, somebody that's going to be able to get you a patent registered if you have a super unique idea. And it's a super, many patents have come about, and created many billionaires. So
yeah, for sure. A good example of that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a good example of that is, obviously I have a lot of family that's in the petroleum industry. And I will tell you that there's these little things that as engineers or as, heads of these small companies that service these oil, big oil conglomerates, in creation of, whether it be a sulfur plant or petroleum plant, whatever it is, they create, they have all these people who create certain things to make things work. And a lot of times it's just on the job need, right? So they sit down and they say, well, we need an adjustment for this valve. We need to be able to get this particular angle. And so if we only had a tool that would do this, or if we only had something that we could craft or create that would allow us to do it. And when they make it and it works, that in and of itself could be $1 million idea. And the person who's doing that is a craftsman. That, it could be somebody who's a welder. It could be somebody who's, an air fitter. It could be an engineer who helped design that and create it. And so when you create something like that, instantly, you should automatically think like, even if I don't want to create a separate business in its entirety, I do want to protect that. That is a business in and of itself. Just having that so that you can market it to other companies that say, hey, look, we used it on this job and it's applicable to the entire petroleum industry. It could be millions and millions of dollars tied up in that one thing. And if you don't do it, guess what they're going to do? They're just going to replicate it. Somebody's going to go out and go, hey, yeah, just fabricate this. Nobody has a copyright or patent on it. And why don't we go ahead and do that? And it was your idea. So, be thinking as I guess the point I'm trying to make is that businesses can come up even when you're not planning to create a business. You just did something out of necessity, but all of a sudden it becomes this business idea. Stop at that moment and really bring that team together so that they can help protect that idea. And
isn't that how Velcro was created? I mean, look at Velcro.
Yeah.
You use it for almost everything. It was created as a fix for something, and now it's its own multi-billion-dollar idea. I think there was a movie. There was a movie about a guy that created I guess it was soundless Velcro, and the guy was lived in this giant house and everything like that. But his claim to fame in life was silent Velcro. I think that was fictional, but it was funny. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's tons of ideas out there. There's tons of money making ideas and things that help society. Get your credit and get your credit and make sure you protect your unique investment and your unique idea. So let's talk about the downside of business. I mean, obviously we're coming out of this global pandemic, and we've got a lot of businesses that are shutting down. We got a lot of businesses that are losing money, and let's talk about the old going out of business. You see it a lot in the restaurant and food industry and stuff like that. They're having trouble. getting back on their feet. A lot of mom and pop type restaurants and things like that are shutting down, or it's sad, but unfortunately that's the reality that we're living in. But you have to take steps. If you're shutting down a business or you're selling a business, you have to take steps to to deal with that. And that's where the team comes in. Also, you got to make sure you shore up any liabilities on a business sale or on a business winding up. You got to make sure you get that CPA in there so you can get any tax liability taken care of, whether that's state tax or federal tax. I mean, because a lot of businesses have state franchise tax obligations and things like that. So you don't want it to hinder you trying to form another business. You don't want it to hinder you. You don't want to end up in a lawsuit based on the sale of a business. So you want to make sure you get that team on board to get your business wrapped up or get everything out in the open if you're going to make a sale. I know oftentimes most of the business litigation that we've been involved in has been really related around a non-disclosure around the time of a business sale, where they didn't disclose some huge liability or they didn't disclose something that was going on, that somebody bought it and they feel like they got sold a pig in a poke, and they want their money back, and that's where the lawsuits happen.
Yeah, and for sure. I mean, and there, like in that, think about this as a context for whether you're getting bought out. You've got this great business. Somebody comes in and they're like, "We're going to offer you a ton of money." Every businessman's dream, right? So you get to retire. We're going to take over your business. Okay. Well, how do we do that? One, you got to have a lawyer, you got to have a CPA, you've got to have the people in place to be able to kind of make sure that your interests are protected and you're not left holding the bag after the business is gone. And on top of that, a lot of times when they come in to do that kind of stuff, businesses that are going to buy out other businesses want non-compete clauses. Even, it could be within a partnership. So you're doing a winding up and you're like, "Hey, look, I'm going to stay in the business." This other partner's like, "Well, I want out." And they're like, "Yeah, okay, well, I don't want to compete with you. I don't want you to, like, 2 weeks later get tired of playing golf or gardening and decide that you want to start the exact same business." Yeah, exactly. So, what does that look like? It could be through a divorce. You could look at it and say, "Hey, do I want to put provisions in there if they're between the partners that, wives or husbands don't have an interest just because you get married?" And there's certain types of industries where a partnership or whatever type of entity you create, somebody else can't own it anyways. Lawyers, doctors, anything typically that you have to have a professional license, they won't allow typically a non-licensed person to have an ownership interest in those types of businesses. So,
Right.
These are particular clauses that you really got to be able to think through. And so as you're creating these types of things, you really think about the beginning, which we started talking about. You think about how do we operate it as it's ongoing. That's really where the team comes in, but you never get rid of that team. Because if you ever need to wind it up, that team's going to come right back in and say, "Okay, well, how do we dismantle something that we created?" It's really important to understand that.
And we went through represented a client on a business sale a couple of years ago, and we had everything from a virtual document room with years and years and years of worth of financials and every single contract that the business had ever done to, and that was all heavily scrutinized during this process. It was almost every slip of paper, I think, that the company had ever generated, and every dollar of revenue,
every employee they'd ever hired, fired.
Right. The whole 9 yards. So, I mean, it's important to keep that stuff, together. That's where the team comes in, because they can help you work through all that stuff, help you get all those documents together and things like that. So if you're ever selling a business and you want to retire and go play golf, you're going to want that sale to go as smoothly as possible. And I think a good legal team, good CPAs, good everybody. I mean, even insurance people, even business valuators. Even some type of scientific professional potentially could be part of this team. The important thing is to get a good team together. I mean, that's all there is to it. Everybody, CPAs are CPAs for a reason, and lawyers are lawyers for a reason. Doctors are doctors for a reason. Bankers are bankers for a reason. And you get a good team together, and you get a good quarterback for the team, and you normally are more successful than you would be otherwise. Is it cheap?
Sure.
No, it's not. but oftentimes it is worth it.
Oh, worth its weight in platinum. People who don't get it are always the people who come back later on and you just always, "I wish I had done that." Don't be that person. Really kind of get ahead of the game and make sure that you're in control of your destiny. Your manifest destiny when you create a business is you want to be successful. Once you're successful,
and
make sure you're successful exiting.
And where we've seen clients over the years, just for small business owners. I mean, this is really, really directed at small business owners because there's whole law firms with due diligence teams to go into a big corporation merger or sale. But this is more for small business owners. I mean, if you're buying that restaurant down the street, or you're buying a pet store, or you're buying a shoe store, or whatever the case may be, that's where you got to be a little bit concerned, especially if it's a small mom and pop operation. You're buying, you're probably buying some name recognition there with that business. Typically, if it's local, you want to make sure you go through everything and make sure there's not some super outstanding liabilities. I mean, we had a case one time where they bought a business and they didn't realize there was a whole slew of franchise taxes that were owed by the business until they were about to close the sale, and it almost uprooted everything. So it's stuff that you got to really be looking out for liabilities. You got to be looking out for potential liabilities. What if they had an employee 2 months ago that's slip and fell in the kitchen and broke a leg, and there's a potential lawsuit out there on the horizon, and it's not disclosed, and you're the new owner. You come in there, and the second day on the job, you get slapped with a lawsuit that you had nothing to do with. So it does happen. You gotta do your homework, and you got to do your due diligence.
Yeah, it's really important to really take that note and put it into practice. A lot of times what we're telling you, you're going to sit down and you're going to say, well, it seems pretty easy. Maybe I can do it without the team. And I'm just going to encourage everybody who's listening, everybody who's contemplating putting a business together, don't take that chance. Because to Bryan's point, there's a lot of years that you go through to get through law school, but then there's a whole lot of years of practice to actually learn the pitfalls of the law. Same thing for CPAs. The tax code is constantly changing. It wraps around the finance code if you're a banker. And so all these people have specific insights to be able to give you to help navigate very shark infested waters. And, so personal liability like that, where you walk in to buy a business, you think it's great, and then all of a sudden it turns into money pit. And you could have foreseen it if somebody would have just done a little due diligence for you. I mean, you can't buy that backwards. So really pay for it up front. It may be an investment, but it's always worth it to have a good team around you.
And the role of the team members can be limited. I mean, you can have a CPA for a limited purpose. You can have a banker for a limited purpose, an investment advisor for a limited purpose, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of roles for people, big or small, but it's worth at least reaching out to the professionals, getting the advice.
Yeah. And, so like to kind of come full circle. So let's consider A-Rod and J-Lo, right? Why are they saying, hey, we're still good friends? Well, guess what? When millions of dollars are wrapped around each other, you're good friends. You're good friends.
You need to be good friends.
Yeah, you better be good friends, because if not, guess what? You're going to have mad drama about separating those dollars. And so that's smart business. That's smart. If it's just business, whether they stay together as business partners or not, all these ventures are really tied up in multiple pieces of capital that are very difficult to separate. So the last thing you want to do is instantaneously become enemies, because that's going to just ensure that all of y'all are going to pay a whole lot of money trying to exit the door. So I would just encourage you, as you're really, whether it's a business that you own before you're getting married or getting together with somebody or taking on a partner, or it's subsequent to the fact, you want to expand it, you want to create new entities, whatever it may be, really think through.
That's a great point. I mean, think about this. I mean, if you have a business like A-Rod and J-Lo might have, and you're talking about how their personal reputations are in the business, their personal, there's a lot to their star power, and people buy products just because J-Lo endorses them. And,
I know there's some Versace around this house just because she wore it. So
and then when there's that split, it could tank their professional reputations. And there's a lot of money tied up in those professional reputations. They've both of them have spent a good chunk of time developing those personas and being a pitch man for whatever it is they're pitching. But so yeah, you got millions of dollars tied up in a business. You're better off being good friends, as to your point.
Yeah, she's all right to look at as a partner. So I'm sure A-Rod's suffering. He'll be all right.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get on the other side of the boardroom with J-Lo. She might. She seems like she's a hardcore businesswoman, which she didn't get
She's
to
that
where
Latin
she's.
temper, man. She's got that
She didn't
Latin
get to
temper
where
for sure.
she didn't get to where she is by being stupid. I mean, she
No.
she's put the right people around her. She's invested in the right places. She's made the right decisions. I mean, same with A-Rod. I mean, he obviously made a lot more money probably outside of baseball using his baseball money than he probably ever did in baseball. And that's normally how they do it. If they got decent decent lawyers, a decent team on their side, they've done pretty well for themselves. So obviously they have. So they're trying to probably maintain those personal, those celebrity personas, but at the same time, kind of exit out their respective businesses. But
yeah, exactly. And I mean, how many times have we represented professional athletes or high profile individuals who don't have that, and instantly they're in a world of hurt when it comes to those types of entities that they've created, whether it's losing money or making money. So they're smart, right. But you don't have to be a superstar to need that team. I mean, so we're talking about in this context because it's really easy to see when you're looking at this macro environment. It's more difficult, I think, when you're, micro. You're kind of looking at this small entity of yourself, looking around, go like, I'm small potatoes. Like, do I really need that? And I'm just going to tell everybody that you do. You really do.
Well, here's a good example. I mean, let's talk about. Let's say you want to open a cupcake shop. You're a small time operator. You want to open a cupcake shop, and that's where potentially a lawyer and an accountant. Let's say you have a small team. Your skill is decorating and making delicious cupcakes. You don't necessarily know what you don't know commercial leases. You don't know, you need a space. You don't know commercial leases. You don't know about buying ovens or whatever else you need to buy for equipment. You need it. You need a certain type. A lawyer can come in and help you negotiate those things, help you negotiate an advantageous, commercial lease, because oftentimes these landlords want years and years and years, and you don't know if this business venture is going to be worthwhile.
A 12-year lease, even though it's a 12-month business. Okay,
right, and then you have a CPA that can probably save you a lot of money when it comes to startup costs and taxes that you could potentially. I mean, that right there could make or break your business, and there's a reason why the majority of small businesses fail when they start up is because they don't make those choices. And like I said, it could be the cupcake shop down the street that you're trying to open up, or a small gym, or any number of different things. And because you're going to get if you have a good product, you're going to get buy-in from the local community. People always want to buy local. I mean, I think that goes across the board. So if you have a good product or a good service that you're offering, you're going to get people in the door. The question is, can you make that work, and your price point make that work? And having these people are well worth the investment to see if you can reduce down the amount of overhead that you have.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, brother.
So we can help with that. So you need us for your small business, certainly reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions. We're happy to help you out. So Sam, how do they get a hold of you?
Yep, I'm in the Metroplex up in Dallas and Fort Worth. You can reach me at 817-914-5470 directly, or you can send me an email at ssanchez@astxlegal.com.
And I'm down in the Woodlands, Houston area. We also have an office in Round Rock, so we can help out in the Austin area, and we can also help out in Florida. So yep. I'm at 281-374-4741, and then I'm at babercrombie at astxlegal.com. You can always go on our website at www.astxlegal.com. That's got all of our contact information. If you have a question, you want to book a time to come see us, we'll be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, and pray for the Cowboys in the draft. Okay, we need some help. My boy Sean, he retired, and so
is that why you're wearing the little? Is that like a death shroud that you're wearing, or is that like is that just
a mourning shroud? It's a mourning shroud.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, he's a great player. I always like Sean Lee, aggressive, made plays.
Hard-headed and aggressive.
All right, man. Well, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. And we'll be back next week with another edition of the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. But in the meantime, Sam, you take care of you, and you and do a great job at it. All right.
Ditto, brother. Ditto.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. If you would like a consultation with either Bryan or Sam, please call 1-888-981-7509 or visit us on the web at astxlegal.com. Once again, that's astxlegal.com. Thank you very much.